For this debate, even if Nick Cave is rocking tonight. So, well, we have three very interesting participants tonight, and we're going to discuss the topic which is really important for this part of Europe. FDI is the concept that we are all aware, and that is running these countries of ours for more than 20 years. We have Ivan Radenković from Serbia. He's a theorist, philosophist, and activist from Novi Sad. And we're going to discuss especially his latest book about the topic of FDI and its influence on Serbia. Stephanie Hürtgen is from Salzburg Universitat, and she will also explain us a bit more of the topic and the differences between the this FDI investment in center of the capitalist states and differences, how does that affect on the periphery. And Toni Prug, socioeconomist from Croatia. He will explain us a little bit more on the things in Croatia, but also how the ideology of neoliberalism has made the FDI so dominant and so influential. First of all, I would start with Ivan, since we're in Serbia, homeland. Yeah. Can you explain us why FDI has FDI ever helped a country to develop, and why not? Foreign direct investments. Yes.
Well, first, can we hear? Yeah. Well, the answer to the question whether foreign capital can serve as an elementary development factor in Serbian economy must be negative by all means. In fact, not just for a Serbian economy. And there are numerous reasons for such claim. FDI are not panacea, despite the fact that almost all politicians from developing countries passionately advocate such conviction, such Weltanschauung, so to say, you know. Foreign capital can serve only as a supplementary stimulus, some kind of a supplementary stimulus to the development and the additional form of accumulation, in fact. But for such purposes, one has to have clear and worked out economic and development politics. And Serbia is by all means no such countries, as countries, you know, in the region. However, economic history shows that foreign capital is structurally unable to develop domestic economy, especially economies of peripheral countries. In addition, that is certainly impossible in a situation where the interest rate, interest on invested capital is higher than gross profit rate in the entire economy. This is the case in Serbia, in fact. Interest on capital is thus higher than long-term profit rate realized through investments. Foreign capital chase simply its own interests. For one, safe and high profits. Two, free repatriation of profits as well. Chance to install oligopolistic and monopolistic domination of a domestic market. High technological dependence of countries that are debtors in relation to foreign capital, cheap labor force, abundant natural resources, etc. Having this in mind, foreign capital almost always create negative economic effects for the country that is forced to import accumulation. Most of foreign investments are directed in lucrative sectors, leading to development disproportion. That is the case in Serbia, because the sectorial composition of FDI is highly unfavorable. Most of them are directed in service sector, banking, insurance sector, trade, storage, real estate business, etc. Second, foreign capital squeezes profit through different channels. Some are invisible, such as transfer prices, double invoices, and some are regular, like compensations for invested capital in forms of dividends and interests. For three, foreign capital therefore creates highly addictive economy, an economy in constant urge not just for a new imports of foreign capital, but also for increase in total commodity import. And this non-selectivity towards foreign capital results from government's utter negligence of the importance of sectorial composition in economy. Because of this and many other factors as well, Serbia is transformed into dominantly import-oriented economy. Banks are in ownership of foreign capital in Serbia and thus oriented in more speculative economy and transactions with Central Bank of Serbia. They're principally not interested in financing domestic firms in the real sector because of huge credit risks. Most of their credit supply is directed towards more safe sector of population and households. 5, outflow of capital is almost a rule, especially from countries where there is a significant political and financial risk and the lack of financial control. Moreover, foreign capital count on significant concessions, different sorts of tax exemptions, low income taxes to build infrastructure by the government. They demand already built infrastructure, subsidies per workplace, opening of free economic zones, home clearance in trade, etc. But today there is no country that can survive without the support of foreign capital because there are no autarkic state. In fact. However, the process of economic development always requires certain imports of investment good and necessary consumers good. Without them, it's not possible to achieve a certain degree of economic development. Import of goods should be paid in foreign currency. If the world market is not ready to absorb available exports from developing countries, or if these countries cannot yet produce sufficient quantities of goods for export, this will result in non-realization of sufficient foreign exchange earnings. In this case, import capacity will have to be complemented by the use of foreign long-term financial assets due to the lack of accumulation and monetary reserves. Imports must then be financed on credit. There are several factors that could limit the effective absorption of foreign capital. This is the case in Serbia. For one, lack of development politics and planning. 2, lack of or inadequacy of domestic supplier network base. 3, weak banking and financial system. 4, patterns of distribution and control over domestic and imported foreign capital, which is quite often used in non-productive purposes or leaks out in tax havens. Unfortunately, Serbia suffers from all of these deficiencies. But what is actually important is the efficiency of transformation of foreign capital into income. In other words, what is the relation between the usage of foreign capital and dynamic of income generation. Usually the higher rate of investment produces increases in the rate of national income. And this shows the efficiency of foreign credit and its transformation into income. What is also quite important is to what extent is imported accumulation directed into financing productive investments and the other expenditure, for example, public expenditures, payment of external debt, etc. And in the end also it is important which structures are taking the foreign loans. Are those structures governments, are those banks, or are those companies? Since most of developing countries are condemned to import the accumulation, it is essential that foreign funds be effectively used for economic development in order to complement national resources and increase the rate of capital formation, rather than to serve as a supplement for national spending and cause decrease in investment and growth rates. This additionally put the pressure on commodity imports from abroad and creates the foreign trade deficit. International funding is supposed to have the role of a catalyzer in the process of economic development, but this is a very tricky thing. Serbia, like most of peripheral countries, faces the problems of low accumulation base and low levels of national savings. In fact, therefore, the excessive and uncontrollable import of capital occurs in the last 17 years constantly. When accumulated problems in the balance of payment, high external debt, lagging behind in development and insufficient exports, the increasing deficit in trade balance, high and cumulative debt service obligations, interest and repayments, melting of foreign exchange reserves, accompanied by the omnipresent dilettantism and ad hoc interventionism in the economy, all this brings the Serbian economy into a situation to take more foreign loans in order to repay the existing debt and interest on this debt, as well to additionally indebt itself in order to keep the formation of foreign exchange reserves and preserve by all means some kind of external liquidity. External accumulation debt is now not a catalyst. This credit is not a catalysator of growth, economic growth, but a brake on development. And this is what happens to Serbia, in fact. In this situation, foreign capital enters in a financial form, enters into the balances of the economy, but only in order to speculatively inseminate itself by an interest and leave out the country. This is the great problem with Serbia. A circulus vitiosus of debts is created, long for debt, but with the constant spread of such formed circles. In such situation, the problem of the capacity of the debt service grows, which grows faster than the growth of the gross domestic product, which obligates the debt to absorb all the growth of the social product, leading to virtually the bankruptcy of the country. This is exactly the problem with Serbia, because interest on external debt appears to be higher than the annual growth of GDP. Interest on external debt is now 3.5% of Serbia GDP, and GDP annual growth is barely 2.7%. We cannot service, this debt, and the economy cannot simply breathe in this situation. They cannot multiply these investment effects, in fact. And this situation makes impossible any kind of a new industrial politics, because all crucial instances and factors, monetary authorities and existing credit politics, trade policies and complete liberalization of trade, fiscal policies as well, consciously undermine common sense. I would like now to refer more on FDIs in banking sector in relation to monetary politics of Serbian Central Bank, because this is less known in Serbian public, but also in international reception as well. First, what we have to know and accept as a fact is that Serbian economy suffers from chronic internal illiquidity. There is simply not enough money in circulation. This internal illiquidity correlates to the monopolization of banking sector and FDI entrance through privatization in almost all domestic banks we had. The main task of Serbian Central Bank is based upon anti-inflation program that includes stability of the exchange rate and prices. In that sense, they choose a politics of targeted inflation rate and a gradual narrowing of inflation corridor. This is the ideal that they choose, corresponds to the EU ideal. They want to achieve the same inflation rates as in EU, somewhere around 1 to 2%. But how this stabilization politics works on the level of economic development, investments, employment, etc. Chosen politics operates with benchmark interest rate, interest as the main instrument of monetary regulation, while exchange rate is the main indicator of monetary politics. Usually it's the way around, but this is upside down situation. Targeted inflation rate is realized through correction of interest rate on repo operations. This is a repurchase of securities issued by the Central Bank of Serbia, so-called repo operations, which represent, in fact, benchmark interest rate. And this is very important thing. There are many reasons for moving to targeted inflation politics, especially because of a greater certainty and transparency of monetary politics. However, it's difficult to fully adopt this concept in an underdeveloped economy that needs high growth rates, while at the same time this economy must address the problems of high liquidity, low and stagnant growth rates, unused capacities, huge obligations from external debt, high interest rates of the economy, unemployment, high external indebtedness, and problems in balance of payments. In such circumstances, the sole objective of monetary policy cannot be simply price stability. In this way, the instruments of active monetary policy, money, credit, interest rate, exchange rates are virtually excluded as a strong stimulant of economic growth and economic activity. Monetary politics is positioned as a permanent, in a situation of a permanent ex post adjustments. It is not an active and development-oriented policy, but almost passive. Benchmark interest is derived from actually financial sphere, financial speculative sphere, and has nothing in common with real interest and credit for production. Those are completely separate things. Benchmark interest has nothing in common with the real price of money and credit relation between real sector and banks. It is derived from the transactions between central banks and foreign banks and insurance companies concerning this repo operation business and government's bond issues. In 2008, benchmark interest rate was 17.7%, gradually decreasing to the level of 4% in 2016. In EU, for example, benchmark interest rate is below 1%. And while Federal Reserves pursue 0% interest politics. What is true is that the benchmark interest rate cannot be an effective instrument of monetary regulation because there is no longer a direct system of lending to commercial banks by the central bank. This is something that doesn't exist in Serbia. These credits have almost completely disappeared, and consequently the impact of the money price of the central bank on commercial bank credits. It is mainly about the purchase and sale of securities in relation between central and commercial banks and the budget. Here one can find structural connection between monetary and fiscal politics of Serbia, investments in public debt, financing the budget deficit and expenditure through emission of bonds, government bonds, defense of exchange rate through buying and selling foreign currencies on foreign exchange market. Let's now see the sectorial structure of credits. Yeah, this is it. In the years of acute economic and financial crisis we see from the 2008 to 2012, a highly expensive monetary policy have been pursued. Total bank loans and the corporate sector increased in the period from 2008 to 2012 at high annual rates of 50 to 17%, while loans on the households grew at the average inflation rate and nominal gross product. In the period of 2030 to 2060, loans to the corporate sector were reduced by about 3% or somewhere around 124 billion dinars. These are the years of a very small increase, but even a large reduction in bank loans to the economy. Therefore, this is the period of a restrictive monetary credit policy and the reorientation of banks from lending to the sector of the population and the state. They simply stopped to lend to the corporate sector, to companies, etc., to the real economy. Economy has remained aside from banks' credit activity in this period. But where we can see the exact problem of internal illiquidity and the lack of money is monetary aggregates. We can see those aggregates, what we can see from these slides. Well, the share of money supply from the aggregate M1, this is cash and deposit money, in fact, decreased sharply from about 44% to only 25%. This is especially due to the rapid growth of foreign currency deposits. And what, in fact, central banks do when they issue the securities to foreign banks? Well, foreign banks, because of a difference between the interest rate. For example, in EU is less than 1% benchmark interest rate. They simply take a loan from their company, from their central company, inside the chain, and they simply convert it into dinars here on our market. And with these dinars, they buy securities. Bank securities, and Central Bank of Serbia is obligated to repay them interest on that. What is happening? The amount of money that was pulled out from the abroad and converted into dinars here, those dinars are simply pulled off from the sphere of circulation and cancelled into the central banks, and the foreign currency serves to make more stronger and higher foreign exchange reserves. And that is the system how we keep the price stability system and lower inflation rates. Why we need big foreign currency reserves, foreign exchange reserves? We need it because in Serbia, the most of a foreign investment entered into also import sector. They're great importers, and they need foreign currency in their daily operations. So, when there is small supply of foreign currencies, the import sector cannot work well. So, what government do? They pull out from foreign exchange reserves certain amount of money, convert it to, they sell it to the world financial market, and the amount that they sell, they must pull out from the sphere of circulation dinars. So it decreases dinar liquidity in the economy, but at the same time it decreases the foreign currency liquidity, because import sector, they pay for the goods in foreign currency, and foreign currency get abroad, you know. And there is double decreasing in liquidity, which simply negatively affect the entire economy, because the domestic economy doesn't have sufficient money supply to pay for that transaction, because it's some kind of a monetary desert. This mechanism of a strong import sector and strong foreign direct investments in banking sector, in fact, monopolization of banking sector, makes this system work how it works, yeah. But you know, who pays the price for this system? Domestic firms, in fact, and all domestic productive factors, in fact.
So the myth of small and medium enterprises is just a
It's a fairy
fraud,
tale.
yeah. Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
fairy tale within this system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. Let's go to the west in Croatia. And
West.
yeah. Now we can see from Toni what's the situation in Croatia, which is a little bit different than Serbia. It's an EU country, and is that had anything to do with its economic development, especially when it comes to the foreign direct investments?
It's another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try. Such a rukač, my hand will be in the air all the time because I have tons of slides, that's how I work. So the whole idea, the reason why I actually arrived at FDI recently, a few months ago, first time I started seriously reading a bit, and I'm still learning, and I've learned a lot from Ivan's paper, and I really warmly recommend it. I think in the one that Rosa office published here, he managed to at times really explain well difficult concepts, but it needs to be read a few times, few bits. So don't expect it to understand everything at once. No, seriously. But it's far easier.
This should be a compliment.
No, it's a compliment because it is miles and miles easier than similar economic stuff that I tried to read in the past. Miles and miles easier, especially because it refers to an economy that is known. So it's difficult. It's different when you read something. For me, reading about Britain or Croatia or Serbia is okay. I can understand it. And it's not as the same thing if I read something about India. So I think that understanding of an economy really helps when you read. And it's that, the fact that you keep in readers' eyes Serbia all the time helps a lot. So anyway, I really recommend it. It's a great piece of work. So I came to FDI as realizing when I moved back to Croatia a year and a half ago, I was stunned by by basically destruction of economic activity, which I always thought was huge, but seeing it firsthand is really painful. B, lack of any sort of meaningful investment into anything, lack of any sort of optimism about anything, and in general, really, really low material quality of life. So everything is expensive beyond anything that an average Austrian or Englishman or whoever French person can grasp. And I kind of stopped trying to explain that, but we'll see in graphs now. So I started talking. It was a discussion really I had, Venke's here, we had in Brussels. It's every time I go to Europe, I think, okay, am I going to go back again? Is it really worthwhile? Is it my nerves, their nerves? So I have Roland telling me here, please don't tell people you will burn my book. Recent. The problem is, no matter how well-meaning my experience is, and I got educated in the core country, you cannot grasp, no matter how well-meaning you are, without living in periphery countries. It may sound unscientific. If that is, then I'm unscientific. I think you need to live here in order to be able to put your knowledge to use that is meaningful. And I think that's why Ivan's paper is, I think, great, because it's clearly he's here and he lives the life. And this is something that if you want to talk about the big guys of the economics, it's something that people like Keynes have written about. You need to grasp life in order to write about it. It doesn't matter that it's economics. So next one, please. So the problem is that we can't measure things, and this is something that also led me to FDI as one of the measures that is often in UNCTAD reports that Ivan uses. It's often referred to, but the problem is UNCTAD was a promising affair. Once I read a little bit about its history in 60s and 70s, because it was the non-alignment movement played a role in forming the UN Commission on Trade and Development. But it really turned into just another apologist mechanism with a lot of useful data. The problem is the way the data is framed really helps in the same way that I found with other mechanisms and other macro indicators, which is capitalist development is natural development. It is the only development, is something that Hayek calls natural, that Milton Friedman calls. They all use the word natural a lot, not in their theories, but when they talk about them. And there is nothing else. So when a new Better Life Index, for example, in 2008, which was the crisis that got Sarkozy, the then French president, calling commission, calling the best brains at the times that were kind of left liberal leaning, their desire was, and they were really explicit in their papers, is to make sure that people legitimately see democratic parliamentary systems as the guarantee of good living, because the indicators, the GDP, most important one, have stopped demonstrating that life is getting better when they grow. And this is actually Sarkozy even wrote to himself in the invitation, says GDP has been growing for a long, long time in the West. Life ain't better for a long, long time. So how do you address that? So what I'm saying is this indicator, FDI is one of those indicators they're trying to tell us. These indicators serve to naturalize capitalist development, and it's the only form of development. That is their role. Their role is not to objectively assess the situation on the ground. And they're written by the centers, by the people who are educated to demonstrate that places where they live and the way they develop are the best for everybody. I mean, fair enough, you know, if you play, you know, a game, you want your team to win. But I wouldn't call it science. That's the biggest problem I have with it. Or I wouldn't call it objective. That's another problem I have with it. You know, it's the OECD has been, there is a great German guy who wrote a book about OECD history, recently written in 2016. It was a PhD, turned into a book very successfully. I think Routledge is the editor, but never mind. Look for it. There he openly and really in a really non-clear terms talks throughout the book. This was a Cold War project. OECD was a Cold War project. It was a project to demonstrate that the Western development is better than the Eastern Bloc development. Sorry. And nowadays we see it as an objective set of measures and indicators. And it's in this frame that I see the problem with FDI. It is one of the very toxic indicators that speaks miles and miles about this difference between what they claim happens and how real life actually is. Next one, please. So the few things I'll talk about it, we'll run through next one. That doesn't matter. Next one. This is something that I haven't updated, and it's actually even not mine, but it's getting worse, not better. Some countries actually have improved a bit. It's depopulation of Eastern Europe. It's basically, they open up the borders, and there we go, we flow. Why wouldn't we? I mean, I went to live to London, so I cannot completely understand why people would want to leave. But to be honest, it's kind of hard to, it's even, for me, it's even hard on the face value to take seriously their ideas of development. I just showed them this graph. I showed to some friends, look, this is what, 25 years of capitalist development, people are escaping in drafts, and you want to tell me, like, should we want more of this? Next one, please. So the recession in Croatia has been nearly continuous for those 6 years. The unemployment is engineered. It's as it is everywhere, but in Croatia they're learning from British, and they're good at it, how they engineer. Employment rate is the second EU worst, meaning 56.9% of population is actually employed. So don't just completely ignore the unemployment. Whenever you see someone telling you, an economist, especially economists, because they know, us kind of self-taught sociologists who have to learn economics, for us it takes a while, but when an economist tells you unemployment matters, they lie. They know it doesn't matter. It's the active population, which is the employment rate, 56.9%. It's around 70% in Scandinavian countries. Meaning that people are, you'll see the graph later, people are basically statistically described as discouraged. They're not looking for work, they're not unemployed. They don't turn up anymore to job centers. Well, hello. Then rapid migration is immense and shocking in Croatia. You'll see it later. Household budget is EU worst in Croatia. 29% of household money goes on food. It feels like Middle Ages. I think they had more, disposable income. Food prices and budget is the second worst in Croatia. And then we'll have agriculture collapsing, which doesn't matter. Next one, please. So this is the graph of underutilized labor, unemployed and discouraged. And you can see there's Greece, Spain, Italy, and Croatia, and Cyprus, Portugal, blah, 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 blah. So don't sleep on Italy. Italy is not one country economically speaking. Anyone who studied a little bit Italy or lived or you're from Italy, Italy is a collection of countries that are somehow assembled together in something resembling an economic activity area, but actually the south of Italy, economically speaking, has nothing to do with northern Italy. Northern Italy is in all textbooks as the best place for small and medium business. It's a textbook example in the world. It has thriving businesses. If you drive through northern Italy, it's tens of miles of small factories. It's a brilliant example of when capitalism works, for at least for local population, they're doing well. Go to northern Italy and you have something that when I went there in the 90s from my hometown Split, and it was war at the time, kind of deprivation of everything, we had cuts in electricity, and I go to South Italy to play the band. My first idea was, this is far, far poorer than where I come from. And it looks like Second World War finished yesterday. There was so much that was not repaired. Seriously, South Italy shocked me visually and in terms of material quality of living. And it's still like that. It's not like that, of course, like in the 90s it improved, but the difference is stunning. So basically, Italy has a huge banking crisis. On their hands, they have the second worst, I think, in Europe, non-performing loans, meaning their businesses' liquidity is also a problem in Italy because they don't have central bank to issue euros, therefore they're doomed. Next one. This is how the number of deleted per week. This guy, I mean, it's really, I think the left should read liberals more. I think the more and more there are liberal economists, the more I'm finding out there are a lot of really genuinely honest people amongst liberal economists. They will just say, as it is, and then conclude we should have more markets, which is case. But like, it's like, how can you conclude? I'll show you some quotes. But you should just take their stuff and learn from them because they're paid to do research. We're often not paid or underpaid, so we should take their research. So basically, Croatia deletes number. These are the discouraged. They basically, what they did, they shortened the time legally prescribed in whatever legal in order to be able to delete people. So they kind of press delete more often. You don't turn up for 2 weeks, 1 week, delete. So more people are missing from statistics. Next one. Then migration, I don't have to tell anyone in Croatia, but for you who are here not from Croatia, basically population is escaping the country like there's no tomorrow. Next, this is the average population, 1960 for 2015. Again, a nice liberal data, it's useful. You can see the drop in 1990, and then you can see another in 2000. This is where they engineered statistics, because there was no drop in 2000, 2002 that was like this. But it's been going down since. Next. Falling birth rates, of course, a huge problem. And you can see when people stopped having children in positive sense. I mean, the war, and then it didn't really continue. Well, there was a sense of optimism in 98. And, but this was before. Maybe Tudjman was really ill in 98. I don't know. But this is basically since 2000, which means, 99. Well, Tudjman died in 99, so yeah. So we haven't recovered since, pretty much. And people have been not making enough babies, which is 2.1 is the reproduction rate. Next. Then this is something that I showed in Brussels and Vienna, but my God, I don't know, I can't handle look at it anymore. Next. This is more immigration. Next, and this is, I'll talk about a little bit more. It is the same. It's all about people escaping in droughts. So mainstream media, which, it was hard to imagine this from the UK. It took me living here to actually be able to grasp the meaning of those titles. So the top one said, immigrants from Yugoslavia believed in returning. In Croatia, they live for good. This is a big difference. And this is one of the kind of, well, the most annoying liberal, I would say, commentators that the moment tortures us with his regular reports. Meaning there was a hope in Yugoslavian socialism, regardless of droughts, regardless of Yugoslavia for the first time, well, the first socialist country that openly said we will export unemployment, and they really didn't say we will have full employment. They didn't go that way. Regardless, people believed in returning. In Croatia, no one believes in returning. There are some people who return, but Next one. So this is a real story. My hairdresser, she told me that she counted. I asked it 2 times. No, you didn't count. She said, I did count. 40 people left the country in this year. I said, okay, 12 months. She said, no. This calendar year, since January 2017. And then an 18-year-old, because I'm taking a driving license classes, because I still can't drive, said, the teacher asked, why are you getting a license? And didn't say, well, so I can leave the country and get a better job once I get a license. Next one, please. This is an important one. I've done nothing clever with this. This will go in some statistical software and get various regressions and to see where is the correlation and get more data. But just very briefly, actual individual consumption is considered by economists to be much better. It's probably the best measure of the quality of life in terms of material consumption, because it's what you actually spend. It's a collection of bundles of goods, and food prices are the average. So you have here Croatia on the top. Average individual consumption is 62% of EU average, while the food price is 91% of the average. In Serbia, for example, it's 46 and 69. So what you can see here roughly is, but we'll see what some regression analysis and the rest will tell us more. But it's kind of plainly obvious there is a certain relation between food prices and your average consumption. Basically, if your food, common sense, if your food prices are low, but you're paid little, I'm paid little about the food, which is not the case in Croatia. You're not paid very well and the food prices are high, which is why there is no convergence, another myth, unlike, Croatia here comes as the worst. Actually, Bosnia is the worst, but poor Bosnia, we're not gonna. Next one. So the role of So it's been now widely acknowledged by policymakers in EU, in ECB, European Commission, a bunch of really important people, that there has been a divergence. I mean, this is a specifically German agenda. This is not something that's kind of objective science. They are trying to say there will be two Europes with 2 euros. We will eject people from Eurozone and tell them, well, have Eurozone 2 or whatever, or have your own currencies, we'll have our own core countries, which I think would be fantastic. I'd love them to do it. And this is why they're saying there has been divergence, because this is, so it's agenda driven. But nevertheless, there's plenty of data to show there has been divergence from day one in Eurozone, not convergence of quality of living. Next one, please. So the trickle down, this is John Weeks, he was in Vienna at this conference recently. So I actually, before I came to conference, I was looking for the development of underdevelopment. He wrote a piece on it in '97. So what he reminds us is that there is no harmonious equilibrium in capitalist development. And this is something the Nature magazine, if you read Nature, it's been circling on Facebook these days. They have a special issue on the idea of historical development of underdevelopment. And they say, for example, how in the series of articles, Historian of Economics mainly, how, for example, China was an industrial powerhouse, so was India before the 17th century. But then Britain rose and underdeveloped them. And what they're saying now is that China is underdeveloping us slowly in some Asian countries. And the growth of China and the rise of China will underdevelop, it will stop Africa from developing. And they're actually saying that Chinese FDI going in Africa is extremely damaging to the country. So that's current Nature, I think is worth checking. So we come to the point. The problem with FDI is it cannot be analyzed if you really think about, this is something that I'm missing in Ivan's presentation, Neoclassical economics. I think you have to look at the core assumptions and kind of weave them in what you discuss, because this is why they're saying it's going to be successful. They're not saying it for no good reason. Yes, and global studies like this one. This is recently Cambridge Journal of Economics 2017. They looked at number of studies and said no trends. We can't see. Gradual global convergence in income levels cannot be seen anywhere in empirical data. Nowhere. Yeah. So this is most interesting graph for me, because it shows on the left-hand side you've got GDP of the US, and then you have USSR trying to catch up. And what you can see is that there is this big curve at the end, which means that there are certain attempts. So, for example, 1930s, Stalin and industrialization, then Second World War. So basically, it collapsed again. So in 1945, USSR only had 20% of the GDP per person of the US. And then afterwards, it goes up and up and up and up and up. It reaches the pinnacle around the oil crisis. So in 70s, you can see the oil crisis, that little spot here, this one. This is the oil crisis here. And then it goes down, and then you have in 80s again the oil shocks and the introduction of neoliberalism, and most importantly, the disconnection between gold and dollar, and US realizing we have de facto world currency and we can manage the world economy to a large extent and run deficits as large as we want by managing our interest rate and by printing as many dollars as we need to buy whatever we want, because who would not take a dollar to, as a means of payment? So this is specifically, there's been recently a huge empirical study in the third world, not third world, it's wrong to say, non-Western, so the non-Western and American business leaders, financiers, politicians, high-level politicians, some even in China, a lot of them anonymous, that ask people, how do you see this, what America is doing with their economy? Why there is no austerity? And they freaked out. People completely openly said, this is incredibly against everything we've been taught. So all these people in the world have been taught neoclassical economics, which says that, well, if you have a huge deficit, you should do something with it. And America doesn't do anything about the deficit because de facto it's their money, they can do whatever they do. So people are saying American economists have been telling one story to the rest of the world, and now suddenly when there is a crisis in the world, they're behaving the opposite. They're not cutting the deficit, there's no austerity in US. Next one, please. Again, the neoclassical economy assumes convergence. There isn't. These are some examples. There has been convergence between Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, South Korea. So some countries did catch up. They are the exceptions. Next one. The FDI, right, and the region. So in the region, this study of Esther and Nualic, and they've done a few studies before that. Just read the bold. So the FDI in 2002-12 in Balkans have had almost no significant impact on key markers of development, with horizontal spillovers on firm performance on the sector level missing. This is key. If there is no, if if an advanced American company comes to Serbia and invests in some biotech, unless Serbian companies in biotech learn from it, it's pointless. The money will just go out of the country, like Ivan said. It will serve for accumulation, but not in Serbia. So the horizontal spillover, it's a keyword. You can Google it when you search for it. It's really important to see. Studies show, do other firms learn? And there is really wide, broad consensus that they don't. Unless it's in a developing country, and then maybe they do. In some developing countries, they do. Why? Because there is an infrastructure, and there's enough knowledge, and there is enough money for new firms to start up. So there is a culture, fertile culture, to be able to. But even then, it only happens sometimes. It's not really. And worsening a current account. This is something I don't know. Have you used Menzinger's study in your? Even in your work, I haven't seen it, but you did. Yeah. He shows really well how current account balance got worse. So next one. This is really funny one, factor movements. This is a Routledge Handbook of European Integration. Sounds like a Bible, Routledge Handbook of European Integration. So Sorens and Villegas Sanchez says, they quote another guy actually, so it's a misquote. I should quote the original authors here. It's surprising hard to find evidence that FDI increases growth, even in developing countries. So, not really, it can help, but not really. And Balkan countries, Esther and Uvalic is the same study, conclude have become, you don't need to be told this if you live in Croatia, predominantly service economies is relatively low level. This really strikes at the heart what shocked me. Really, it's not only that Croatia turned into tourist heaven and service industry for tourism. It's really like, it's, I'm not going to use the words here. Next. So this is me reading Ivan's study, and I really enjoyed it, and I'll keep reading it, and there are some key points he talked about. I'm not going to repeat it. Next. Right, so the mainstream press, which is unfortunately UNCTAD now, is a mainstream press, they say, we're doing fine. Just look at how much developing economies, look how much FDI they're getting. And, the transition economies here, this is the USSR, this is Russians and their satellite, as they call them. Next one. So state is getting involved a lot, and it's basically China. When you read state gets involved in FDI, pretty much you can read China, because if you take China, it's an outlier, the whole statistics change. But it does talk about telecommunication sector in Europe, still France, Germany have large stakes. This is something new. So it took them 20 years of East Europe, socialism collapsing, blah, blah, for them to show data like this. This is the first data set that I know of that has state-owned companies statistically well taken care of. Next. So this is one example of this kind of liberal neoclassical thinking that's actually well-meaning. This is the same center, and the whole study wants to support the single market. As mentioned, there exists virtually no research to show that increased competition reduces slack. Slack is the unproductively used stuff in firms, people, labor, capital, so that firms are getting more productive. There is no evidence. But it's nevertheless reasonable to presume that this is indeed the case, and then the effects, well, how come can you presume? You just said there is no evidence. He said, because of neoclassical economics, this is why. So, but
must be all balanced.
Exactly, but what surprised me, trust me, when I first studied this 10 years ago, a little bit, because really I've been studying the last 6-7 years properly, they changed this. As there exists virtually no research to show that increased competition, this would be impossible to find in a paper before 2010. It changed massively situation since 2008-9, and this is something that the crisis did. They finally, the honest liberals started telling, we don't have any empirical research, but let's presume. Well, no, you don't presume if you live in Serbia, Croatia. Next, mergers and closures. This is another presumption. Greater economies of scale, larger markets, more competition. We'll talk about it in a moment. Next, please. So they're talking about FDI, talking to us that we'll get the previous slides that I ran, that we'll get better variety of products, that this is what FDI does, it does. And then you have the European Commission having commission after commission, special commission, trying to figure out why there is oligopoly in every single country in EU. This is literally what they report. And as a result, the last bold, the retailers are able to impose trading terms on their suppliers which are far from balanced, meaning they have nothing to do with how markets would judge the value of these products. They can only impose their own terms because it's few retailers that run the food. So these beautiful single market produced oligopolies that are now being brought to us here in order for us to enjoy more little chocolate. It's a good chocolate actually, but go on. Next one, neoclassical economics. Briefly, I don't know, is there a word talking about it? The most important thing is what I bolded here, is that it detached itself from reality entirely, and more and more research comes out where they openly acknowledge our core research is not empirically verifiable. It's not, it's fine, we're not. Milton Friedman was big in the 50s. He wrote that famous, one of the most quoted ever papers on methodology in economics, which says as long as your predictions, your forecasts are correct, it doesn't matter what's inside the model. So assumptions can be completely unrealistic. So they said for decades, okay, fine, fine. But then they had decades of no successful predictions. And then they came in 80s, Imre Lakatos came at the LSE with Paul Fairbairn. They said, we have this idea of research projects. And research projects, scientific research projects can be, they can go wrong for a while, but we don't know how wrong this while is, how long it will last for, when they will recover. So basically, he said, Neoclassical economics, it's a good research project that has a bad phase that has been lasting for 100 years. No, seriously, I mean, this is what interpreters, Lakatos never said this, but interpreters really said this. They said, we are in a bad phase, but when was your good phase? So what Imre Lakatos said is that and he was a really clever guy, he used natural sciences. He said every core, so it's not, I mean, it's a serious, really good theoretical propositions. He said, even in natural sciences, core scientific research programs, they have hardcore propositions which are non-empirically verifiable, and that's fine. We have it he says in biology, medicine, science, I can't verify, but if he says so, I believe him. People said he did good research on this. So he says it's fine, we can have it in economics, you don't have to worry. The problem is in biology, chemistry, blah, 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 it's an exception to the rule. It's one-off, it happens occasionally, you don't have hardcore. And he found those, that was my impression. In Neoclassical economics is the rule, you don't verify the core. Then on top of the core, you have this layer which gets empirically verifiable, but it never touches the actual core assumptions. There's no empirical data, they just, they will run through this. And this is, so I'll finish here. So I've been starting to think that since I live now in Croatia, my idea is that integration of periphery countries into core, which started with Yugoslavia in the 70s pretty much with the markets, has been damaging, that it did no good long term, and that it creates deprivation and poverty. And I'm starting to go, how do I report in a multifaceted way, not talking about one single index or a number or a story, a narrative about deprivation and poverty. And FDI was clearly, so this number 6 here was on my slide before I knew that I will be actually talking here. What FDI also does, it includes peripheral countries in core at the low position of added value. Added value is very low, and then they push you and they dictate terms. And it's called value-added erosion. There are a number of papers now, just search for value-added erosion, which are empirically demonstrating, without neoclassical brouhaha, that the money that you earn, the profits that remain in the country, and the labor that gets paid are getting squeezed. Meaning Foxconn pays less for their, Foxconn gets paid less by Apple kind of story, which makes sense, and we know it happens, and kind of we get reports in newspapers, but this is now serious research that's showing that even if you have a greenfield investment in FDI, you will never be able to reach the level of development that the core countries have when they produce the same thing. So it's kind of an uneven relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Toni, for this interesting lecture, and a lot of stuff you'll be touching with this. Stephanie, can you tell us, Toni and Ivan showed us how the empirical data are not telling us that we're improving, but what's the secret of the FDI concept and how they make it do it? I mean, we're not living better, but the concept is still living in the academy among the politicians and the economists.
Yes, not only in academy, but also, as you said, it's a ruling concept. First, I have to say, if I would have known about your presentations, I think I would have changed a bit, because I really like to argue, but maybe this is for debate then, against the idea of a clear opposite of peripheral and core countries. You said a couple of times that profit stays in the country or not. This makes the picture as if in Germany the profit is in Germany and we all profit from our profit, but this is not true, of course. I mean, we have a class question here, and this is that also in Germany salaries are going down. Let's say more or less the half of the salaries. So we have a core workforces which, still enjoy, you have to say, high wages, but we have poverty rate in employment, which is equal to that of Great Britain, which is 23%. So, and we have a precarious workforce, which is nearly as high as that. So it's something, or higher, it's something like 30%. So we have to be careful in confronting these two blocks as such. But okay, this is not exactly my talk about, but in the other we will debate about that. Okay. In many things, of course, I can continue and maybe not a synthesis, I mean, this is too much, but try to get some things maybe together. Yes, so I have a kind of, oh no, sorry, yes, I have to make my sign. I have a kind of agenda which looks larger than it is, because I will be very quick. I start with the FDI as a development question, then I have something to say about that. I want to introduce a concept which is structural heterogeneity. I restart the official debate about, or the official concept of development, and then I come, after the fifth point, of course, to some conclusions. So FDI, as you have already said, is officially in all our countries combined to what we call development. The basic argument here is that for development we need capital. And as we are in capitalistic societies, this is not only force, as we know. I mean, we have to have, or we have, I mean, yeah, this need to have some investment and so on. The next point in that development story is that with FDI, with direct investment from abroad, from Western core countries, peripheral countries have the chance to be touched to new technologies, know-how from management, market access, new products, but also this is always going along with it as if it is a natural, outcome of FDI investment welfare. So the promise we have all over the world, let's say, is that FDI brings welfare via investment, new technologies, know-how, via, as I said, as I put it here, becoming part of the modern Western world. So this is a promise. And the promise is, going along with it, becoming part of the modern Western world, is to have both economic and social development. The basic idea of development is that it combines both. Yeah? We have good going enterprises and social, benefits and welfare. What is important to realize is, and we discussed this the other day, is that this idea of investment structurally goes together, is linked with its opposite, which is devaluation. In fact, to promise, to draw this story that FDI brings modernity, welfare, and so on, the existing structures have to be somehow devaluated, have to be destroyed, both ideologically and materially. Ideologically, we see it when we talk about local workforces. I think you can tell same stories about Serbia. I can say it about Polish workforces, Romanian workforces, East German, I'm from East Germany, East German workforces, that the main argument from management side is, we are very sorry, but we cannot pay you more because you are not yet modern, as in the West. You are not yet adapted to real flexibility, to real, state of the art of the capacity to work. So there's a kind of, ideological devaluation to legitimate low wages, for instance. There's an ideological devaluation of women's work, of course, especially arguing that, okay, when women go to work, it's more because they like, producing textiles, for instance, because this is what they ever have done in the whole history of mankind. And so when they go to a waged labor, it is not really waged labor for them, because it's something they make like a hobby and, to enjoy. And so there are many, ideological ways to downsize, to devaluate ideologically what is socially to be found in these countries where investment take place. But there's also, and you both spoke about it, or mainly Ivan speaks about it in his paper, material devaluation, which is huge deindustrialization. the story that investment brings, you know, the happiness of mankind, of course, goes along with the destruction, economically, with the destruction of what existed there before, which is, in my case, Eastern Germany, heavy deindustrialization. We have had nearly 5 million people unemployed in this beginning period of the early 90s. But also destruction of existing economies links in other ways via privatization, for instance. So we have, together with the idea of development via investment, we have the idea, or we have the fact, it goes along with devaluation. And when we take both together, in fact, materially, something emerges which we can call, it sounds a bit difficult maybe, but it's easy to understand after some words, hopefully, structural heterogeneity. Structural heterogeneity is a concept coming from from the global south, formerly called third world. So the idea is that when we take, you know, underdevelopment, devaluation, destruction, together with investment, what we see as a result is a deeply polarized, disconnected economy, polarization in two very different economic sectors. One, highly profitable, modern. I mean, when we talk about investment, we do not only find fashioned, you know, old-fashioned machinery, but what is becomes more and more typical is modern machinery, also in the global south. So highly profitable, modern production sites, but next to very disconnected small businesses, not developed technology, family-based, informal work, etc. So the idea is a polarization of two economic sectors. However, when we look at it from a... this is not still... no, one back, please. This was too... Yes. The picture, or the how to say, the image, we can understand this structural heterogeneity maybe a bit easier, is expression which come from this debate, which is arguing that investment in the global south creates something like cathedrals in the desert. Yeah, so you have modern production sites, but deserts around. I mean, we talk about, it's a bit cynical all the time to talk about that, like that, but to put it strictly directly. However, when we look at this structural heterogeneity because it is polarized, from a point of view of labor, things are a bit different, which is that both sectors, of course, are connected. They are connected via the quality of work, the quality of labor. The extremely low wages we do find in Serbia, but also in other Eastern European countries, as Poland, as Romania, as Hungary, as the Baltic states, are in a certain way only possible because there is this sector of informal, family-based work and economy, which substitutes a bit the lack of real direct wage income from the modern sector. In Poland, for instance, and I think we can find very similar stories. Oh no, I know it. I mean, not only I think it, but in Poland, the deep crisis, the deep bloody crisis, and which really is comparable in the beginning of the 90s to Greece today, or for a couple of years now. People somehow survived not only via the exodus, via migration, but also via what you know better than me, maybe as kiosk, you know, family-based little shops to sell something and so on, or via agriculture. I mean, so what we find then is a combination of the modern sector from production and the non-modern sector via work and reproduction. And this is very important for the whole development story, because official development theory in this moment says, they have still this kind of agriculture sector, so they are still very traditional. We do need more modern investment to get them up to more development. But this seemingly traditional reproduction style via agriculture and so on is a result of this investment via modern transnational companies. Sami Amin, famous theoretical theorist from development theory, calls it seemingly or false a traditional reproduction. So coming back to the official development story, politicians, management, all the official, think tanks and so on do not stop here in this moment. They say, as you have not been developed before, as you have been desert, culturally not educated, not modern, traditional, you don't have to be so impatient, you have to wait. It's a question of time. You have to be patient. First, you have to adapt a bit, in your structure. We have heard this all. I know it from East Germany. We called it the Valley of the Tears. I have learned that, I forgot the expression, but you have a kind of similar expression in Serbia. So the idea is that through a valley of tears, a valley of suffering, then development will come up, and finally, we'll all enjoy it. However,
suffering.
Like phoenix from the ashes.
Yeah, but like phoenix, but via adaptation. So it's more material than phoenix, I would argue. So this delayed development goes via two stories. The first is cluster building, regional cluster building, which is that, okay, we have a cathedral in the desert in the beginning, but after a while there will be regional suppliers from the region, so there will come up in a whole regional and finally national development, economic networks and so on. And the second, so somehow delayed development story is called, and this is management speech, I'm sorry because in the debate we have it all in mind, but it's also the official way to talk about it, it's upgrading. Upgrading from what we call low end, you see it on the left, poorly montage, assembling, to a more sophisticated, qualified work. And the idea is that with that technological upgrading, we do find social upgrading. So this goes, it seems, together. However, as you already maybe expect, this is not what's taking place. Because first, this regional development, this regional clustering is very limited. Transnational corporations and transnational production networks are globally combined, globally connected. So there are local suppliers, but for instance, when I made my research about electronics in Eastern Europe, the local, so-called local supply was something like 5 to 10%, more 5 than 10, by the way. And here it was accounted things like catering, or I don't know, post office things or so, yeah? So local firms made this. Okay, there are other cases like in the automotive industry, but the local supply is limited, and again, it is in direct competition with transnational supply. All supply firms are, or nearly all supply firms, or nearly all brands, let's talk like that, nearly all brands do have transnational global supply firms at the moment, in the automotive industry, in the textile industry, in the electronics industry. So the local is a kind of alternative for management to choose what kind of supply do we want to have. And this makes, of course, huge pressure on the conditions of supply and finally conditions of working. But the second story is not true either. The idea to come from low end to high end does take place. We observed it in Poland, we observed it in different countries, but wages are not going up with technological upgrading. So there's a gap between technological upgrading and social upgrading. The promise that when you have become modern, really modern, then you will socially also profit from it, is not what's taking place. It's not taking place because, as I said, when we talk about FDI, I mean, even this category is misleading somehow, because we do have to talk about global production networks. And global production networks include global labor markets and global markets of production sites, and global markets of production sites also for what we call qualified, developed labor. I did not put here migration. So I mean, for the global labor market, I did not forget, but you have to imagine, of course, you have to think about migration here too. So what is now in this situation, and I mean, this is not only scientific, talk here. It's a kind of experience workers have, as I said, in Poland and other Eastern European countries. They said, okay, in the beginning, we have been, not that, we have been low end, we only made some assembling and so on, but then it changed, but we still have these low wages. What's going on there? And now the official story is very interesting because it ends. The official story says, now when people, and this is all from direct research now, from my personal direct research, when people now say, now we want to have better wages, better working conditions, management says no. We are in a cost competition. We are in a global cost competition. And all these quotations here, I don't want to cite them all, are real arguments I have had directly into my microphone, which is how you see here, Eastern Europe is seen right now as a high-wage region compared to, for example, the Ukraine, to Serbia. Serbia is competing, I know it from my last stay here, is competing directly to Tunisia, for example. Many production from textile from Tunisia came to Serbia. Serbia is also competing to Romania. Romania and Serbia together are competing to China. China is competing with the Ukraine. We know from the research from Bettina and others that Bulgaria, Romania, and so successfully achieved to be cheaper than China. I mean, this is a whole cost competition story, which in the end, and they say it openly, finally, management, but also, you quoted them, politicians and academics, in fact, it's the end of development. And this, I would add, or I would like to add for debate, is, I didn't put it here, but it's for your ears now, it's neoliberalism. Because neoliberalism is not only to play only on the market. Neoliberalism is to say, we have to play on the market, but there will be no wealth for everybody. This is Friedrich August von Hayek. So the idea is that we all participate in market, we have to, even forced by states and so on. So it's a political task to make everybody participating in the market, but the outcome is a kind of risky game, and if there are losers, as for example in Serbia, but also in Germany, I added that, but also in Poland, in China, of course, all these losers, this is part of the game. So there will be the next game, and we will see what this brings out. So the end of development, and I think this is what we experience in Europe at the moment too, with all this crisis. I don't want to go in details. This is that officially it started with FDI, and I think, if I got it right, you are here in Serbia a bit in this phase, if you like. But in the end, it will be that, okay, now development for all, welfare, wealth for all is over. This was in the past. My final, so this is my speech now. The end of development is point 5. So the question is, what do we do with it? How to come out? And, I mean, this is a huge question, of course, but my proposal would be that we start, and we have already started, of course, to talk and to develop a different project of development. We have to have develop it on a local and global scale. I mean, this is for sure. And we have a very important resource for that, and I wanted to bring that in the debate. because we sat here yesterday evening and we spoke about global social rights and the ILO and the UN and so on. And I would put it in the phrase to bring back humanity in development. I think maybe it sounds strange for trade unionists, but I think what is needed is to talk, to develop and to talk about a different story of development, which is with humanity and not against it, yeah, to put it like that. Not only because we have these institutions, but also, and this is also part of my research and a very important result of my research, that all over the world, let's say in China, in Serbia, in Romania, in Western Europe, people who work, and unemployed of course too, do argue in the name of human being. They say it's not just that we are, treated like machines. That is not just that we can't live on our wages. It's not good that even migrant, even some racists argue like that. If you talk a little bit to them, they say, okay, it's a bit inhuman how they are treated. It's right. Yeah? So this norm of being a human being is, I think, as an everyday practice and attitude, and as the little solidarities you find in the enterprises and so on around the world, a very important resource to use or to play on more for the local global project. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, we have started a lot of topics right now, and I'm not sure how much time we have. I would like to ask the audience to ask some questions for the speakers. Krunoslav.
When I had a kind of interview or something like that for Deutsche Welle, I think, on the topic of FDI, it was quite easy for me to refer to Ivan, Toni, and to criticize FPI and the consequences of FDI. But when they asked me what are our proposals, what is the left economic strategy, that was much harder. Good for me, he asked me only one question on it, and I answered in something like, okay, it will be, everything will be better, and so on. But in fact, I think we have our critics are, or the way how we are criticizing FDI is a very detailed and very grounded way. I mean, what Toni and Ivan here told us, that is really a hard economic theory. It is everything is scientific and so on. But when it comes to present some alternatives, then the left is lacking concrete proposals. In a way, at least for me as a non-economist. So if someone will ask me in 1 or 2 years what are concrete your proposals, how is the left economic policy shaped, then it would not be, let's say, it would not be enough to say when the socialist revolution once happened, then we will arrange the whole economic system completely different, and. So what would be the concrete, maybe steps to counter this concept? Because Stephanie, Toni, and Ivan, and every of us know that this concept is at this moment the hegemonic concept completely, and with how to counteract it.
Yes.
I wanted to add to that, maybe to make it even more complicated, but maybe to also, leftists. No, but I was thinking about one thing that Stephanie said, that there is an end to the promise of development at one point, and I think this is and the promise of neoliberalism is telling us, like, you have to participate on the market, but we can't tell you if you get anything out of it. And I think this is a situation that is also putting neoliberalism into question. It's not that hegemonic anymore, because also, Toni, when you presented like this wealth of literature, that I think what was quite obvious is that they can't that there is not such an unquestioned hegemony of neoliberalism. And I think this is important also for us to acknowledge that there is that we are at a point where, of course, it's not that, you know, people like say, okay, neoliberalism, that's it, we are done. Like, get us something new, like, I don't know, socialist production and reproduction. But you know, like usually if you look at it like from Gramscian point of view, hegemony, like complete hegemony, is unquestioned hegemony. And I think what is happening now is that there is there is a questioning of this very incomplete and very unequal promise, and it's becoming obvious that there is no promise of wealth for everyone. And I think that this could be an entry point for debates that we are having also in a wider, like to bring this into a wider audience. And the second point that that I wanted to start with anyway, but that makes it more maybe more adds a certain level to complexity to what Kruno asked. I think the left doesn't only have to think of different economic policies in a way, but also of a different narrative and of a different promise in that way. Because I think that what we've been seeing in almost all the countries in Europe, that right-wing populists, nationalists, and you know, these kind of movements are really growing pretty much everywhere. I think this is also like a reaction to people feeling disenfranchised and in their everyday life, in their economic participation, in their social life, and so on, and that the left needs to get them, you know, with a different narrative, but you know, like the right that more or less tells them, you know, like there's someone else who wants to get that little piece of pie that you still have, and you have to defend it against them.
Okay, well, also political elite benefit from this. This is simply the mechanism which incites the corruption. In fact, is some kind of a noose effect, side effect of this kind of a system. What was also the point? Yeah, I think that also benefits concerning what I was talking about, the dominance of import-oriented economy and so on. Most of the foreign investors who are in this job, obviously, yes. And how can we make certain small steps to make a difference in terms of what I've spoke about today? I think that first thing which had to do is to completely change the monetary policy, to think about in a way of expansion. That means that we must knock down the benchmark interest rate to around 1%. The other aspect is because the whole banking sector must by law have this dinar and foreign currency reserves, and these are huge money which is immobile. It serves for nothing, it's just safety money. Must be redirected in the industry, in the domestic industry, because we cannot make the multiplication effect and generate the income, because we have a monetary desert. In fact, simply economy cannot work. GDP growth is very, very poor. and our obligations on the level of paying interest on external debt are huge. They are more than 3% of GDP. So what must be taken into account is how to animate the domestic industry in order to keep the money in reproductive sphere, not to go into consumption of a final goods and get out from the country. We must keep it within the economy, and this is concerning monetary system that is completely necessary. To run the expansion monetary politics at the risk of a little bit higher inflation rate. Because price stability, foreign exchange stability, it's not synonym with the economic stability. In fact, it proves that this system kills the economy, in fact.
Bruno wants to know, how do we save the world now? After he asked us to talk about FDI. Thank you. No, you asked a question which we didn't address at all, so it would be unfair to answer, but I will, because I want to. Narrative, what Wenke said, the left lacks developmental narrative. And I think what Stefani said is a really, really great opportunity that I honestly, before your presentation, I didn't think about this at all. It's not something that I researched, that I came, that there's no development, but really there isn't. When I think about it, it all makes sense what you said. And I know the data about certain East European countries being cheaper than China, because I know that some reports from London companies would literally say, well, yoo-hoo, we don't need to go to China anymore. Actually, let's relocate to Bulgaria, Romania, wherever. Why? Because it's cheaper to transport. Transport costs are huge. So actually it's beneficial to them. We can beat them in price a bit. The price can be a bit higher in East Europe because of transport costs. But anyway, narrative is lacking. Apart from the narrative, the knowledge about monetary, what happens with money in financial sector is terribly lacking. There are a handful of people really that I know on the left in the world that actually actively write and research on this. We lack certain skills to be able to say what happens with government sovereign debt, like stuff that Ivan is researching. Definitely that has to be restructured. Inflation has to be brought back. Controlled inflation has to be brought back. There are a number of countries, Argentina is one of them, that show that controlled inflation does really work well for exports. Industrial policy has to be defined and it has to be plausible scenario that has to be tradable. So you can't have people coming locally to you to buy your stuff. Your stuff has to be it has to be a physical product. It can be moved. So no tourism. Tourism can be your spine. And I think that narrative has to include full social reproduction, which has to be demonetized. So meaning your kindergartens, your books at school, a lot of the stuff that the average family in Serbia, Croatia struggles to pay for. The new narrative on the left has to be the society will take care of the cost of this. And the progressive taxing system, which is still not talked about, has to be aggressively discussed. I mean, there are so many issues. You ask, I could talk for hours just about this. I mean, none of these are mine ideas. These are just ideas that are floating around. But you're right in the sense that I haven't seen a single narrative being linked. Narrative is the biggest thing that's missing. And I think now, when you have papers like what I've shown, but by the way, all the quotes that I've shown are the people who are for the European Union, for the markets. They use neoclassical economics. They're not critical. There is just so much stuff that shows that their system is not working that they feel, as honest liberals, we have to at least show that. But then we'll pretend, So in that sense, you're right. And this makes sense that it's the end of development. So that's about, narrative, monetary policy, inflation. What do you produce? Who's going to buy your stuff? Possible monetary, but the problem with this is that left has no political power. So when you have no institutions to educate your people, your cadre, because you really need this. I mean, it's how can you? Who do we discuss in Portugal about the currency zone? I think that Europe needs a secondary currency zone. I'm not for kuna. I'm not for Serbian dinar. I'm for a currency zone. But this currency zone, who's going to debate it? Like the same people in Portugal, people who run Croatia. So we are in a position where not even our elites, but the opposition in our countries for a long, long time, I don't know Portugal, but at least here, has been completely for the markets and against, in their own ways, and against anything that's meaningful. They don't really care about, they just want the peg to euro and will be in euro, and that's going to save the country. So who benefits in Croatia? Well, there's a really interesting Gordan Fižulić. Well, very few people here can read Croatian, but anyway, read Goranko. Goranko Fižulić is great pieces because he's been in the government before. So the fund that bought Agrokor, roll up. Again, people don't know the story who are not from the region. Well, how do I say it? It's really the hedge fund at the moment of crisis when the biggest food retailer nearly collapsed, lack of liquidity, they can't pay people anymore. The government comes and takes the fund with a special law drafted only for that particular instance, which is basically takes one of the biggest countries in the region, not in Croatia, which owns a lot of the stuff around East Europe. Takes the country and allows a vulture hedge fund to buy their stock at the 25-30% of the value, and then takes a new loan and acknowledges 25-30% as a full value and pays back half of the money. We're talking about between 100, 200 million, they still don't know, maybe up to 300 million euro, which changed hands in a day. And this is the biggest crisis that Croatia economically faced for a while, for good maybe since 2009. And what happens there is that it's a private hedge fund. It has 15 investors. They do not report to SEC anything other to the Securities Commission in the US, anything other than who owns the stock. And this is not the investors. So the owners of the hedge funds are not the investors. They just own the company. Those 15 investors are fully anonymous. So think for a moment, what if those investors are Croatian elite? What if one of those investors actually invests in the name of the people who run Croatian country? Basically, you have country being pillaged for hundreds of millions of euros at the time of crisis where the company is falling down by a vulture hedge fund through possibly local investors from Croatia. We can never know, and the legal system is on their side. The US system, the US legal code, protects that company from, they don't have to discover who are the investors. Actually, they are legally entitled not to tell who are the investors. And the guy who's put in charge of restructuring this company, when the state took it over, kind of didn't nationalize it, but kind of semi-nationalization, when they took it over in order to kind of save it, this guy signed the contract with this American hedge fund. He met with them in secret, which I know, and then he signed that he cannot be removed, because if he is removed, they have the full say what happens with the company. So who benefits? The reason why people in the certain elite in Croatia can benefit from ripping apart of the country is because the international financial system is set up in a way for them to do so. The same way like Norwegian Bank did a huge report last year on aid and said basically for every dollar of aid, there's, I forgot, number of other dollars coming the other way. So the illicit funds flows from the rest of the world to the center, to the core countries. Sorry, I don't mean core countries workers, I mean just core countries capital, core countries elite, which is not the same thing. But workers in Germany, we know that have been suppressed, the wages can be suppressed for a long, long time. And, we know that inflation, which goes through wages, the Germany did not support this, and that made it more competitive. That's what Flasbeck analysis and Lapavica's number of papers, they've argued. I don't know whether they're right or not. But they are, I think they are. I mean, I think they are because it's well acknowledged in economics that the biggest indicator, the best indicator of inflation is wage cost. So if you allow wages to go up, and it's agreed that the EU zone, especially the Eurozone, not just the EU, will have a controlled inflation of 2%. Germany did not respect this. They suppressed the wages, made the companies more competitive, and in a sense, an already more advanced country made itself more competitive by just disagreeing. But Germany can disagree, of course, and Greece can't. That's a political situation. So the international system of complete lack of transparency of flow of funds is perfectly geared that any elite that runs the country can rip the country apart if they wish so.
Okay, where to start? First, I really thank you for your question, because it gives me the possibility to underline what was maybe a bit overseen during my presentation, that the question of center and periphery is, as in geography we say, multi-scalar. It is not only along nation borders. It is also among regional or along regional borders, local borders, but also along borders between different workforce categories. So you mentioned villages and countryside. I recommend you to have a look at the movie in, I don't know if you know the website, Labor Note, no, not Labor Notes, what is it? Do you know what I mean? LabourNet, thank you. LabourNet. It is called Mother's Strike. It's about feminist action in Poland, in Wrocław. And there you have Wrocław, one village. And you see how really, I'm very sorry to speak like that, but third world-like living conditions these women face, which work in the same time, in a special economic zone, by the way, for a transnational corporation, for wages which have something like, you know, 2 euros, 3 euros, something, sometimes nothing. So this is in the village. I mean, it is really, you have multi-scalar fragmentation, and so we have to speak about multi-scalar confronting of periphery and center. So this is where, by the way, Lapavitsas and Flasbeck are wrong, because they only look at the national level. They only speak about German wages as such, Serbian wages as such. This leads me to the question, who profits? Very important question. I did not put it here. I really thought about that because it somehow is the other side of the story. Because it's not only, you know, financial system, EU Commission or so, there are real groups which profit from this development. In theory or in the debate, we talk about transnational global classes or global transnational classes. So what we have here is not only the international labor market for production, for workforce categories who go to on the blue collars, so to say, but we also have a transnationalization from the management side. When we look at this little town, or it's not so little, by the way, in Poland, Wrocław, and this is typical, by the way, also for Serbia, for Romania, all these towns inside, in a very center, are renovated, are nicely made, have brands like Starbucks, McDonald's, whatever, IKEA to buy, to live with, have high rents for the flats. To be a bit simple, but you can say it like this, this is for the transnational class. And there are people also in the global production network. It would be too easy to say white collars, because this depends on the country. But it's more or less, let's say, management and up, you know, and sometimes also white collars. The incomes from management in Poland and in Germany approach. Yeah? The management in Poland have nearly the same income as, because they are externals, they are global, you know, they go for 3 years to Wrocław, 3 years to Serbia maybe, and then to America. So it's a whole way, you know, they are not attached to this production side. So there's a transnational, let's say, economically and politically ruling class, and transnational, you know, working class, suppressed class, as you would like it. And you see it in the geography of every country. You also see it in Germany. Yes, I don't want to go in details there. What to do? I would talk, or I would start a bit from a different angle than I think the two of you. I think it is not worth, so to speak, to imagine ourselves in a kind of alternative politician who now makes a different currency policy, different, I don't know, euro and European policy, Europe of the two parts of Europe, two Vitesse, what is it, two Geschwindigkeiten, speeds. So I think this was my idea, and I take it seriously. The end of development from capital side means that we cannot any longer inscribe ourselves in development by capital. I mean, I really think that we are in a historical situation where we have to accept, to understand that capital is no longer a kind of motor, a kind of agent for development. It has never been for the Global South, by the way. But now it comes to the Global North that this is not longer the case. It is the agent of development for a shift of people in the Global North and in the Global South, but not for the whole, let's say, population. And so I would start, as I said, I would start that we have to be serious about everyday practices in the world from the side of the people, and to rupture with the official narrative and taking this different narrative, this different project of economy, which would be, yes, a totally different one, which is about human beings, social reproduction, ecology, and so on. I know it's difficult, but I think it must be a kind of, you know, of course, fighting for better working conditions in transnational corporations, no doubt, but also looking at alternative ways of producing, networking, social movement, unionism, we spoke about all that. I think we have to bring together different efforts to really start developing a kind of, completely different economic understanding of development also.
Thank you. I'm not sure, do we have any more time for question or something or comment? I had a lot of questions, but I'm not sure I'm gonna ask any of them. So thank you guys for not going to Nick Cave and staying here, listening to us. I think you have a lot of stuff to think about after this, definitely. And the drink.